of Virtual Earth Month. So thanks for joining us throughout these 2 weeks. So before we get started, I have a really interesting presentation. There's a couple of just ground rules I just want to cover. So first, the first thing you should do is make sure your Zoom is in side-by-side mode. If you go to your toolbar under view options, you can change it to side-by-side mode. A gallery if you want to see everyone on video, and just presenter if you just want to see the folks that are speaking. That way you'll be able to see the full slideshow and the presenters' faces as well. Also, I have turned the live transcript feature on. So if you prefer to watch with subtitles, you're able to do that in the toolbar as well. You can turn it on or off, whatever your liking is. We also would ask, please, if you come up with some questions to ask during the course of this presentation, put them in the chat, or at the very end, you can unmute yourself and you can turn on your camera if you want. You could just ask the questions, but we'd love to have a nice discussion with y'all as we learn more about what happened with the whole snowstorm, the winter storm here in Texas not that long ago. And also, we will be recording this. I'm about to make this also live on Facebook. So if you don't want to have your face seen at all, just make sure that you don't turn your camera on over the course of this presentation. Also, you may be here because you would like to get some prizes. We have awesome prizes that we're giving away, and you can earn points towards giveaways just by tuning into our live virtual events. And what you're going to do is collect code words during these live virtual events. And one code word is 1 point. 1 point is one entry into the random draw giveaway. And obviously, the more points you get, the more chances you have to win awesome prizes. We'll have the code word written on a PowerPoint slide. It will be spoken by the presenter, and it also may be put in the chat. So just pay attention to those. And then just keep track of them, write them all down when you're done attending our events or watching the recordings of the events. Put them all in one email and send it to sustainability@tamu.edu. And you can earn up to 7 points when you watch live. So we're really trying to incentivize our live audience. You can only get 1 if you watch the recording, but up to 7 if you watch live. And you can even earn cash through Maroon Base. So it's a separate program, Maroon Base. You can get points towards that program by tuning into our events. So check that out, download that app. And if you want to have more prize rules, go to this website right here, or go to our website, sustainability@tamu.edu. Sustainability.tamu.edu, sorry, and you can check out all those prize rules. And then I just want to let you know what the prizes are. You could win a Nintendo Switch. Who doesn't want a Nintendo Switch? You could win fitness watches. You could win an iWatch or a Samsung Galaxy Watch. You could win some wireless headphones like AirPods. You can win a Yeti cooler. You want to take a camping trip? Hey, you're set up. You want to get a GoPro Hero 7. You can film all your adventures, make a cool video. So lots of cool stuff. And hey, maybe you want to be decked out in the coolest Office of Sustainability gear. We have t-shirts, we have some water bottles you can get. So just some great incentives for participating in our events. But hopefully what you really hear is for this next part, and that's this really interesting presentation. Was the free market worth freezing? It's a really interesting question. So we have a couple of Office of Sustainability interns here with us today, Jaedyn and Savannah, and they're going to talk to us about what you may have heard called snowpocalypse, but what happened around that time with our energy system. So I'm going to stop. They're going to start sharing the screen, and they're going to take it away whenever your ladies are ready.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Well, howdy, everyone. Before we get started, we just want to give a quick intro of our speakers for this afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and start us off. My name is Savannah Bogard, and I'm currently a senior environmental studies major. Both myself and my partner Jaedyn, like Ben said, currently serve as interns with the Office of Sustainability. We're really excited to talk to y'all today about such an interesting topic. But before we go on, I'll go ahead and let Jaedyn introduce herself.
Hi everybody, my name is Jaedyn Medrano, and I am currently a junior renewable natural resources major with a minor in sustainable architecture and planning.
So today we're going to be talking about the failure of the Texas energy grid during Winter Storm Yuri this past February, and our presentation was the free market worth freezing.
We will be going over the policies and historical precedent that allowed for the creation of the energy grid as it exists today, why the grid failed, the associated impacts and their complex interconnected relationships, actions by politicians, and just future implications for energy infrastructure. So, when the slide changes, I'm not sure if the slide has changed. My internet is a little bad. In mid-February of 2021, right before Valentine's Day weekend, a cold front moved in and the whole state of Texas experienced record freezing temperatures and a winter storm that caused the whole state to grind to a halt. Officially named Winter Storm Yuri, but more commonly referred to as the snowpocalypse, this extreme weather event left most of Texas covered in a blanket of snow. And the city of Houston, a close neighbor to the city of College Station, was placed under a wind chill warning because they had an observed wind chill of 1 degree.
So before everything went wrong, the internet was really quick to make a variety of memes and jokes about just like the fickle weather that is characteristic of Texas. Sometimes in Texas, one day it feels like it's 80, 90 degrees, like it's summer, and the next day out of absolutely nowhere, it's winter. That's not that rare, but I think that people in general were just really excited about a possibility of a second snow day, maybe the prospect that they might be able to get off of school and work if it actually froze. And in Texas, when we get freezing weather, we're not equipped to deal with it. So basically everything shuts down. But soon people started to realize that the storm was going to be a little bit more than just a day off of school. And they started to panic. Even before the storm became too strong, people heard it might be bad and started to rush to grocery stores and hordes in order to grab supplies, very similarly to the hoarding experience at the beginning of quarantine last March. I know that I went to the store right before and the shelves were absolutely empty, and that's kind of scary, especially if you don't quite have what you need. Then also, as roads began to freeze over, wrecks and accidents occurred all across the state. A huge pileup accident occurred on Highway I-35 in Dallas that was all over the news and included at least 100 cars. The road conditions caused most people either to choose to isolate in their homes for fear of getting in an accident, and those who were brave enough to go out were often inexperienced and unprepared for driving on roads that are freezing. But perhaps the most harrowing thing that occurred, and what we're going to be discussing today, is that millions and millions of people in Texas lost power because the Texas energy grid failed. So we're going to talk a little regulation and policy and just about kind of regulation of the energy industry in Texas and also its privatization.
So prior to the year 1975, electricity regulation was conducted on a city-by-city basis, meaning that the electric grid of whatever city it was thought it was the best way to go about it was basically how business was carried out. So a mishmash of different management styles all across the state. In the year 1975, the Texas State Legislature enacted the Public Utility Regulatory Act in an attempt to give the state more control over just regulating electricity prices and the quality of production. This was considered a failed attempt as most cities continued on with business as usual, and it just extremely limited the amount of control that the state had over the electricity market at all. Utilities companies started to monopolize the market and created concern among government officials and individuals as to the cost of the electricity. This monopoly was largely caused by a shift in fuel consumption type in the US. In 1978, Congress passed the U.S. Fuel Use Act in order to help with the oil and natural gas crisis, and utilities companies were not allowed to use natural gas in electric power plants and boilers, instead being required to use nuclear fission and coal instead. This inflated the prices of electricity on the market, and it became clear that with the current infrastructure that we had, most Texans would be unable to survive or just even afford electricity with what limited utilities there were.
So you may have heard of ERCOT. ERCOT, or the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, is an independent non-for-profit organization founded in 1970 that oversees the transmission of electricity over the power grid that serves most of the state of Texas. The way this organization is structured is that they're governed by a board made up of 16 which include 6 market representatives from electric utility market groups, 3 consumer representatives, and 5 independent members. ERCOT CEO and also the chair of the Texas Public Utility Commission are also members, but they do not have voting privileges.
So House Bill 373 was passed in the year 1995, and this required ERCOT to make some changes in the way that they operated, including deregulating the electricity rates that previously had been regulated by the Public Utilities Commission of Texas. Utilities meaning to give independent energy operators access to transmission capabilities so that they could support the wholesale market. Unregulated entities or participants would have to be recognized as members of the wholesale market, and non-utility market entities had to be granted the ability to offer competitive market-based prices. And then we come to the year 1993, in which Senate Bill 7 was passed, and this bill required ERCOT to create competition among the retail electricity industry. This favored the price to peak concept, which is an idea that in theory means a regulated price rate would help control the way utilities companies price their electricity. And then on January 1st of the year 2002, the Electric Utility Restructuring Legislative Oversight Committee, that's a mouthful, was created to oversee the implementation of Bill 7 and deregulate the energy system of Texas.
So in 2002, the Texas electric utility industry transitioned to retail competition. And in a competitive energy market, there's this problem called missing money, which basically means that the price for energy in these types of markets often don't fully reflect the value of investment in resources needed to meet customers' needs for reliable electric service. To solve this issue, competitive mechanisms like a minimum capacity demand can be used, but ERCOT ultimately decided not to implement mechanisms like this, and instead, in 2014, decided to use a modeling system called an operating reserve demand curve. This curve uses a scarcity pricing system, which is linked to short-term market conditions. And because of this, it can be extremely sensitive to current conditions, which means this type of modeling can be risky for trying to predict how to meet long-term energy needs or trying to predict energy needs when something outside the ordinary happens, like an extreme weather event. And now we're going to be discussing how climate change is connected to grid failure.
So in our modern day world, we know that we basically all thrive off of industry and development. And these industrial operations often use the harvesting and burning of fossil fuels, factory farming, and just cooling and refrigeration in order to provide goods and services to the people. But these industrial operations emit a lot of greenhouse gases. The most common and most damaging that we know of are methane, carbon dioxide, and hydrofluorocarbons. So these greenhouse gases work sort of like a blanket and trap heat inside of our atmosphere instead of it being refracted back away from the Earth like it normally is. This just causes the global temperature to rise, and it just increases the chance for extreme weather events to occur. Now, global warming, like I said, it increases the temperature. It causes a lot of standing water, surface water, groundwater to evaporate and become water vapor in the air. But it's too warm for it to ever, turn into precipitation. So it just accumulates in the air, and what we refer to as, being really humid Texas weather. And in January / late January, early February, whenever all that cold air came into town or came in across the Midwest, really, it reacted with the precipitation that was in the air, and it created snow. And just the freezing temperatures of the cold front combined with the precipitation that we were already creating, and it was extremely detrimental to industry across the state of Texas.
So Texas's infrastructure just isn't really designed to withstand extreme cold conditions. The majority of Texas rarely experiences freezing temperatures like we experience. And because of that, no one really wants to invest the money to winterize our energy equipment, whereas in other places and states, their energy infrastructure is built to keep going in extreme cold temperatures. So because of that, this meant that a lot of machinery wasn't able to work during this time, and the state of Texas really struggled to produce energy, and we had to rely on reserves. But we also had limited means of transporting this energy and these reserves, which resulted in a deficit that meant there wasn't enough energy to serve the entire state of Texas. Now we're going to be talking about impacts of the grid failure.
Probably one we're super familiar with is that people were having to forage for food. They just had to find different ways to eat without power. And so for people who were brave enough to go on icy roads, they were still having a lot of trouble finding food. As Savannah mentioned, all the grocery stores were empty. They weren't getting any deliveries to restock their shelves. Most restaurants and fast food chains were closed, and they also weren't getting any deliveries, and they were trying to keep their employees off the road. People had hoarded supplies beforehand, and some people had more than they needed, so they basically just created an inequitable distribution of food or wealth during, strenuous times, and a lot of food went to waste in places where it was stored because power went out and it went bad before people could buy it or even just take it for them to eat.
So not only is energy infrastructure in Texas not meant for extreme cold, but infrastructure in general in Texas is not meant for the cold. Texas homes are designed to keep heat out. So the lack of heat trapping and design meant that people had to really bundle up and stay warm because there was no electricity and no heaters. Also, water pipes are not winterized, and people were kind of unsure when or how it was appropriate to drip their faucets. So water pipelines were bursting and causing really unsafe situations where people didn't necessarily have reliable access to water and also experience flooding. Low water pressure also meant that in some places water potentially was contaminated and boil water notices were put out, but people were kind of struggling with that because they had no electricity to do so. And also here is one of our code words, it's boil. ERCOT had ordered that there be rolling blackouts across the state to preserve our energy. However, people and communities would go without power for 10, 20 hours at a time, and they didn't know when they would have power. So people really had to be creative or struggle to normally use electricity for. And now we're going to talk about some response from politicians.
Great. So many citizens, as you know, of Texas were quick to blame the Texas government and politicians. They were urging them for resources to survive through the rough conditions. And there were many politicians across the United States that were responding to what was happening, but we're going to be specifically focusing on Texas politicians. So there was a viral Facebook post from the former mayor of Colorado City, Texas, a man named Tim Boyd. It went viral because he posted a message essentially telling citizens to buck up and stop looking for handouts. And I will be reading this to you now. So he says, "Let me hurt some feelings while I have a minute. No one owes you or your family anything, nor is it the local government's responsibility to support you during trying times like this. Sink or swim, it's your choice. The city and county, along with power providers or any other service, owes you nothing. I'm sick and tired of people looking for a damn handout. If you don't have electricity, you step up and come up with a game plan to keep your family warm and safe. If you have no water, you deal without, and you think outside of the box to survive and supply water to your family. If you're sitting at home in the cold because you have no power and are sitting there waiting for someone to come rescue you because you're lazy is a direct result of your raising. Only the strong will survive and the weak will perish. Folks, God has given us the tools to support ourselves in times like these. This is sadly a product of the socialist government where they feed people to believe that the few will work and others will become dependent for handouts. Am I sorry that you've been dealing with without electricity and water? Yes. But I'll be damned if I'm going to provide for anybody that is capable of doing it themselves. We have lost sight of those in need and those that take advantage of the system and mesh them into one group. Bottom line, quit crying and looking for a handout, get off your ass and take care of your own family."
So many people felt abandoned by our representatives. Ted Cruz, one of Texas's senators, was all over social media after deciding to take a trip to Cancun, Mexico, because his children's school was canceled for the week, like many children's schools was canceled. People were really quick to criticize him because this crisis was happening in Texas, and also we're in the middle of a pandemic. So people feel that traveling may not be the most responsible decision. Cruz even made a statement where he was talking about experiencing no electricity. heat and water and really struggling with that. And so people really came for him, talking about how being able to make, that decision to leave Texas and go somewhere else really came from a place of privilege, and that many people in Texas were stuck, unable to leave even their homes, and were struggling to get the resources that they needed.
Great. So during the middle of the snowstorm, the current governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, went on Fox News for an interview with Sean Hannity. And during this interview, Governor Abbott made statements against renewable energy, blaming the complete failure of the energy grid on wind turbines to keep producing electricity. Instead of addressing ways that people could provide aid to the people in need who are freezing to death, Abbott chose to make a very partisan statement by tying renewable energy in Texas to the Biden administration and the Green New Deal. I would like to note that the Green New Deal is a proposal introduced by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey. It wasn't supported by President Biden during his candidacy, and it has not been passed by Congress. As you can see in this little graphic here, this just shows what we were using before and during the snowstorm to survive. We were largely reliant upon gas before the snowstorm, and we were still largely reliant upon it before. But the differences in between how much our energy came from wind before and during are remarkable, and as you can clearly see here, it was not the fault of the wind turbines. Moving on to my least personal favorite response, we have former Governor of Texas, Rick Perry, who took it upon himself to make this statement on behalf of all of Texas. He said, Texans would be without electricity for longer than 3 days to keep the federal government out of their business. Try not to let whatever the crisis of the day is take your eye off of having a resilient grid that keeps America safe personally, economically, and strategically. However, after the freezing temperatures and associated complications as a result of Texas's deregulated infrastructure, over 100 people are dead. This loss of life was completely avoidable and completely unnecessary, and I don't think that those who lost loved ones in the storm would agree with Rick Perry's statements, and it draws an interesting connection between privilege and the desire to deregulate. Perry also made statements about wind turbines being responsible for the grid's collapse and the importance of diversifying energy in order to build a more solid foundation for reliability. While diversity has been shown to be a key factor in making communities sustainable, Perry's suggestions for making energy more diverse in Texas consisted of building a strong foundation of coal, oil, and natural gas. When taking into consideration what diversity means, that statement is redundant because those are already the main sources of energy in Texas. Furthermore, Rick Perry himself is largely responsible for enabling wind power to have a place in the state of Texas by allowing for the passage of renewable energy positive policies. He made renewable energy the scapegoat in a situation that he had a hand in making.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about ERCOT and legal issues. So many organizations have actually decided to sue ERCOT in response to this incident. One example of that is CPS Energy versus ERCOT. CPS is the municipal power provider in San Antonio, and they made a comment about the situation, claiming that it was one of the largest illegal wealth transfers in the history of Texas. Many were looking towards a completely unrelated case, but a case that recently went to the Texas Supreme Court, Panda Power versus ERCOT, just to see how ERCOT could be sued, how they can be held accountable. And on March 19th, the Texas Supreme Court made a very polarized decision. And I'm not going over too many details, but basically they ruled that they didn't have jurisdiction over the matter at hand because ERCOT is an independent organization. Again, I know I didn't give too much information, but basically there's just still a lot of vagueness surrounding whether ERCOT can be sued and how they can be sued because they are private and not a governmental organization. And the public really was looking to this case to get some information and some precedents. So we're approaching the end of our presentation, and we just wanted to leave you with a little some ending thoughts. So in the future, in order to decrease the negative effects of climate change, there are two broad categories of action that can be taken. Adaptation focuses on reducing the negative effects climate change brings, while mitigation focuses on mitigating climate change itself. The winter storm proved that adaptive measures in Texas need to be taken in order to ensure that our current power system is more resilient to climate change and able to operate during extreme weather events. Mitigation is also needed to reduce the effects from climate change and prevent more extreme weather events from happening.
So in this graphic, you can see just the distribution and the types of resources that we use for energy in Texas. Blue is in black are gas and coal, and then wind is green. And I throw this up here just to show you not only how much are we really using across the state, but where are those power sources lying. So there have been other hypothesized consequences of climate change that could severely negatively impact the systems within Texas. The energy grid is not susceptible to just freezing temperatures. If the rising tides paired with a thunderstorm or hurricane, many of the industrial hubs of Texas where they extract and refine non-renewables could easily be flooded. This would render the resources useless, destroy any existing methods of transportation, and poison the ground and surface water that thousands of people are reliant on. So, something to think about. And then we're going to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals a little bit. In the year 2000, the UN, or United Nations, released a plan of action known as the Millennial Development Goals. They were supposed to act as a guideline for the nations of the world to follow in order to make the world a more sustainable place. After analyzing and considering the progress that had been made toward the Millennial Development Goals, the UN released a revised plan known as the Sustainable Development Goals, which were more specific and inclusive to the different parts of our world systems and designed to highlight all the important elements of sustainable communities. The SDGs circled here are goals that were negatively impacted by the winter storm and areas that should be specifically addressed through mitigation and adaptation in order to make Texas as a whole more resilient and sustainable.
So Texas's current political culture against government regulation led to this creation of an independent energy market for our state. This market thrives off of competition and maximizing financial benefit and has not been willing to take on the cost of winterizing our energy grid. This caused the entire grid to collapse during this past winter storm and left millions and millions of people to fend for themselves without power. Texas has many steps that it needs to take in order to strengthen the resiliency of our energy infrastructure and work to achieve those sustainable development goals.
Also, it's the director for our Office of Sustainability. It's her birthday today, so we wanted to say happy birthday, Kelly.
And that's the end of our presentation. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Jaedyn and Savannah. A really powerful presentation. I definitely learned a lot. I think it's really interesting to see something that most of us, I would imagine, on this call have, lived through, and then to kind of put that other, perspective with, some more details and some research behind, what we're hearing and what we're seeing, reactions and the actual reality of it. So thank you very much for that. Love if anyone has any questions, if they would want to ask any questions right now. This is a great opportunity to do that. But before, if people aren't going to ask questions, I have some questions that I can ask myself, just trying to figure out which question to start with. I guess one thing I'm curious about is you talked a lot about the power plants not being winterized. I think what you saw is a lot of politicians using this moment as a way to kind of further their political career, with some of the statements that they were making, but not necessarily talking about what actually happened, the actual impacts of what happened and what we can kind of do to make sure it doesn't happen again, rather than, making it political, just making it more, this is what actually happened to us. These are the facts we saw on the ground and what can we do about it? So with that in mind, and knowing that ERCOT needs to be winterized, have you seen any discussions or any policies or anything moving forward that would, cause ERCOT to start having to winterize their grid?
Me personally, I didn't read anything. Right now, it seems like everybody's just kind of in a big scuffle over whose fault it was, rather than trying to actually address what happened and making sure it doesn't happen in the future.
I think the fact of the matter is that this discussion already was happening. Like, people knew that our energy infrastructure wasn't winterized and that we could experience a situation like this. So I really think that something powerful that happened after this storm is that the public is a little bit more educated about this topic. And so maybe, you know, through legal action or just kind of advocacy, the public can be a really strong just supporter of making our energy grid more resilient.
Yeah, and that's something that's like good for everyone, right? It's not like based on your political affiliation, like having a strong, resilient energy grid that benefits all Texans. Would you say that's accurate? Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. And then I was thinking about what you had just said. I had like a follow-up question and I lost it, unfortunately. Oh, so you talked about, so what you're saying is that the people that are running ERCOT and Texas politicians, they were aware that this grid needed to be winterized, that they were aware that something like this could be happening and our grid was in danger, right? You made that point. So do you expect, like, you know, you've heard conversations like, oh, it's a once in a lifetime weather event, you know, it's just like an extreme weather event, it's not going to happen again, we don't need to really worry about it. Do you expect that, you know, this is something that we do need to keep worrying about in the future, or is this something we can just forget about?
I don't know if you want to go first.
I was just going to say, I think it is something that the state of Texas needs to take into consideration, just because it's not only extreme weather events, like or extreme cold weather events. We focused on that in this presentation, but Texas, most people know, also experiences things like hurricanes and tornadoes and extreme heat events. And also there in 2011, Texas experienced kind of, not to this magnitude, but also experienced an extreme cold weather event. So a situation like this, not to this magnitude, has happened before.
Yeah.
I was
Do
just
you
gonna
want
say,
to
when I
add anything, Jaedyn?
yes, when I was researching this, I read a lot of like reports from people both in the state of Texas and outside, who they basically like had examined the Texas like electricity grid and just how it's set up, and they're like, hey, you know, we recommend that you improve this. Like, of course they don't have to, it was just recommendations that were given, but they're like, you need to winterize these things just to keep it up to a certain standard, because what if something happens? They were focusing less on like the climate change aspect of it and just that, you know, things needed to be updated, but also like me connecting things to climate change. At the rate that things are going, I think it would definitely be helpful, because I think extreme weather events like that are definitely become way more common. I know we're all basically used to natural disasters happening right now, but we'll also have natural weather disasters happening now.
Yeah, so when you talk about that, it makes me kind of think of, you know, resiliency. So do you kind of, you know, think like that you know, I think one of the barriers you're going to see is people saying there's a high cost to winterize things, you know, as like you know, kind of as like I guess, yeah, like to be resilient for the future, to plan for the future. So what do you think? Do the costs, you know, like the upfront costs, are those worth it if you were to invest in winterizing? And I guess why would it be worth it if you think it is, or why is it not worth it?
Say I took a class on NEPA last spring, and over it my professor really liked to touch on the precautionary principle, which is basically like the concept of planning and projecting ahead to see what could go wrong and see what the consequences of what that would be, and just preparing for, like, basically saying, okay, let's say this thing is going to happen, let's prepare in case this does happen. And I think that, like, when you look at case studies and incidents where they have done this, it's been really successful in just mitigating and keeping down the total cost of a disaster. Because what was it, Hurricane Harvey, when that happened, there are people who are still rebuilding their communities however many years later. The impacts of a natural disaster happening like this are just really expensive and it's very long term, and I feel like spending some money up front will definitely you know, protect us from having to literally to spend billions and billions of dollars across the United States to repair what's been lost.
So I guess what you're saying is if we would have winterized our ERCOT grid, that would have probably been a more cost-effective option than, trying to repair everything and all the damages that resulted after the fact. Yeah.
Pretty much.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Interesting. I don't have any other questions in the chat. I guess there are a couple other things that I was kind of interested in. First of all, have you seen any impacts on the renewable energy industry, after this whole snowpocalypse, and a lot of people are, blaming renewable energy and wind power as, the reason why it happened. Have you seen any, impacts on the overall renewable energy industry?
I haven't looked it up.
No. Okay. Fair. Okay. All right. Let's see. Do you have any online resources for us to do further research on the Texas energy grid and how to make an impact in our communities? Any online resources?
I'll drop some in the chat.
Okay, cool. Jaden's going to drop some in the chat, so that'll be really helpful.
Yeah, I also, someone in the chat was talking about how, hopefully everyone remembers this when, it comes time to vote again. So I also think just paying attention to, honestly, especially your local politicians, like local government, and seeing how they feel about energy and energy infrastructure is really important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a really important point. Definitely thinking about how certain politicians handled this, how they responded, how they're going to respond to it. And just thinking, are those the folks that we want, to be leading and making decisions, for our state and for our communities, and not thinking about, being partisan with your politics, but like, what are their actual policies, and, how did they handle this, and how are they going to, handle that moving forward? So I think that's something that can hopefully people might actually kind of learn, from this, that, the people that are in power they do make a big difference on what happens with natural disasters and how we are able to get through them. So I think that'll be really interesting. Jaden threw a link here in the chat. Cool, awesome. And I'm trying to think if there's any other questions. I think that's all my questions. I don't know. I don't think anyone else has any questions, but Jaden and Savannah, do y'all have any concluding thoughts or anything that you wanted to get across before I recap what we have coming up next?
I think so. I guess just going forward, maybe we could try to choose people who understand how the electricity system works in Texas, and maybe elect some people who will make the appropriate changes so that doesn't happen again.
Yeah, sound advice. All right. So now I'm just going to quickly share my screen real quick here. And I just want to let you know, so tomorrow at 5 p.m., we are going to learn, well, we're talking about renewable energy, so we might as well continue the topic. We're going to learn about what are the ethical implications of a transition to renewable energy. So that's definitely an area around renewable energy that there hasn't been a lot of conversation around, or at least I haven't seen a lot of conversation around. So I think that'll be really, cool to kind of get a little bit deeper into that and think of some other, kind of consequences for it's like we definitely want to transition to renewable energy. We know that's the way, to have a cleaner, a future for everyone. But there may be some other concerns that we need to consider as we transition into renewable energy and making sure it's equitable and accessible for as many people as possible. So I think that should be an interesting way to consider that and think about that topic. And then just, oh, sorry, that's closed. So hopefully you got your applications in, but internships closed yesterday. So that's what we have coming up next. Thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope you all have a great day, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. And I guess I should have said it's tomorrow at 5 p.m. will be our next call. And I put the code words in the chat, so make sure you grant those down. But anyways, thank you all. Oh, and it sounds like Jaedyn, you had a family member here and they said they really enjoyed it. You should invite them to more things. So lots of thank yous. Y'all did great. So lots of positivity in the chat. So thank you for your time. Great job, ladies. And y'all have a great rest of your Tuesday. Bye, everyone.